You're halfway through the movie and already you're just kind of like, so my aunt's got a birthday party.
Did you hear that?
Slash.
There it is again.
The remains of the missing teens were found severed into pieces.
It's better what you stand.
It's like something out of a horror movie.
That's some scary shit, Bob.
Oh, scary shit indeed, Diana.
Well, hello, Mr. Slash.
What's up and welcome to the Slasha Brotha podcast. I am your host, Rashard Cunningham, the brother who gushes for the good, the bad, and the most gory cinematic or streamed horror story. And this week, I am giving you guys a bonus episode on the movie The Last Matinee. And The Last Matinee is a Uruguayan film by Maximiliano Contenti. And also, it was co-written by Manuel Fasal. The movie stars Ricardo Islas, and Ricardo Islas is a horror director. Ricardo is really well known in Uruguay. He actually has a huge list of titles under his belt, whether it's directing, acting, producing. He is just like kind of a scream king in his own right.
When y'all saying my name, put some respect on it.
However, nobody else in this film is like a huge or big key player in any Uruguayan film community, I guess. He is also the one who directed the movie that the soon-to-be victims actually see. The movie is called Frankenstein Day of the Beast. There's like this fun interconnection of just like horror directors and everybody like sort of just working together, and then they put one of his films in their film. I think that's fun. And also, it's cool because Frankenstein Day of the Beast is a movie that is in English, but from my perspective, I'm watching a Uruguayan film with subtitles. If you're watching on Shudder, it has subtitles. And they're watching an American movie with subtitles. So it's kind of funny that we're watching like a double, I guess, dose of subtitles in a way. The movie is set in Montevideo. The reason I chose this one for a bonus episode is because, one, it's still on theme for season 1, which is Basic Slice and Dice. And I also really wanted to cover this because when I heard what the premise was, it got me really fascinated because, like I've mentioned in past podcasts, I am in the process of doing my first ever comic book work, which is horror anthology, in a slight similar vein to Tales from the Crypt. And, well, then again, I can't even say slight. It's kind of in a vein of Tales from the Crypt, but with a little bit of a more longer-winded story, I would say. But at the same time, another one of my stories that I was going to be doing in between my horror anthology books would be epic stories that are usually slasher stories. And I came up with this idea of doing a story about a massacre that happens in a movie theater. And this idea developed from years back because it was initially going to be a drama story that was actually going to be a book, and then, you know, years later it develops and develops and develops and develops, and I sort of put my different, I guess, ideas together. But what I decided to do was I was actually brainstorming one day about being at Comic-Con, and say somebody asked me, well, you know, we really love your horror anthology novels, would you, and you seem to do a lot of nods to slashers and everything like that, would you ever cover Scream as a comic book? And I thought to myself, would I? Because there are artists who create their own stories or horror stories, and then there are artists who do killers and horror stories that are already known and have a, you know, a timeline and a canon. So, you know, there are Friday the 13th comic books, which I have. There are Nightmare on Elm Street comic books. There are Hellraiser comic books, etc. And me, I'm very against drawing serial killers or slashers that are already known. Like, I would never put Jason in one of my comic books. I would never put Freddy or Michael, or, you know, I would never do a known thing. I would make a nod or a reference or even mention a movie, sure, but I wouldn't put the actual character or figure into my story because I feel like that's not my character to take. I'm very kind of, I guess, particular about that. And so I thought to myself, if I were to do a Scream comic book, one, it would be in a similar vein of the TV show. It'd be different kids, different story, different killer, different town, different state, different setting. It would be completely different. And then on top of that, also coming from a black artist and also coming from a queer artist, it's like, okay, you're going to have a different voice. You're not going to have the same voice. Like, for example, if Clive Barker wrote Scream, it would be totally different from Wes Craven writing Scream and Jordan Peele creating Scream. It would be those would be three different complete movies. You know, it wouldn't even be truly the same because it'd be those ideas, but coming from different men who also have different backgrounds, different life experiences, different ages, grew up in different time periods where, you know, cultures and the way we approach certain things in our society were just different. You know, the atmosphere was different. You know, Clive Barker's atmosphere was probably not as close or similar as Wes Craven's, and definitely probably not as similar or close as Jordan Peele's, and their experiences all probably vary from mine. And so I thought I would do something completely different to the point where it wouldn't even be Scream and I wouldn't even be comfortable using that title. You know, I think I've only created one story that is based off of a current film that exists and used that title, but kind of like as a subline. But even then, like the actual title is 100% different, you know? And even then, the only thing I said is it's a blank story, but it's not a, you know, but it's not the, you know. So I just feel like if you're going to do that, I would do it differently and approach it from how can I make this 100% original? And me, I approached it from a different standpoint of exploring, you know, certain themes and elements that are, you know, more privy to me. Meanwhile, yes, there are references to horror movies, but not even directly, because I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have someone talking about Basic Instinct or, I don't know, Friday the 13th. I didn't want that. I didn't want it to be a direct, okay, it sounds like Scream, like these kids are straight out of Woodsboro. I didn't want it to be that. I wanted it to be, no, these kids are from this town, and this town is got some issues. And there's a reason why there would be a killing spree at a movie theater. And so that's basically my approach. And also that's what piqued my interest. Now with watching The Last Matinee, which also has multiple titles, by the way, I wanted to mention. It's also known as Red Screening, and watching on Shudder, it's actually introduced as Al Morir La Matinee. I probably butchered that, but I also did flunk Spanish. And so basically I approached this movie and found out that, one, it is very different from my idea of how I would approach a massacre in a movie theater, but it was also very refreshing to just see that while I would be focused on story, character, and backstory, this movie is really just a random act of violence, and it truly is. Like, you know, even thinking about the movie Random Acts of Violence, it really is a random act of violence, because this story focuses on a killer that goes into a movie theater, and all these patrons are just random. This killer could have struck any time and it would have been random, and who knows what the scenario would have been. And so it's not like this was a premeditated thing. My story, however, lots of premeditation, lots of planning, lots of how are we going to do this, how are we going to do that, how are we going to trick people to thinking this person's the killer, that person's the killer. There's a lot of, mine is a whodunit, but this is not a whodunit. This is just a straightforward, a murderer goes into a movie theater, locks them in, and and starts killing people. And so where it starts off is this movie begins in Montevideo, like I said, in 1993. And we get this really awesome opening shot. So we have the camera just going through a cloud of exhaust that's coming from a factory chimney. Then we get the title card and also just everything overlooking the city. Until we get to a rainy day where this man in a dark slicker, I'm going to call him the eyeballer because that seems to be his thing. Basically, this guy, he opens up with a jar of pickled eggs, and it's like kind of gross, but later it turns out that this guy also has a thing for pickling eyeballs.
I think I'm going to be sick.
And what he does is he collects the eyeballs of his victims after he kills them, however he chooses to. He decides to make way into the movie theater. Meanwhile, at the same time, we also get our main character and final girl, Anna. Anna is young. She is an engineering student, and she seems pretty with it, pretty like savvy and comfortable in her own skin for the most part. She just is also she seems very tense and on edge about a lot of things, but also I get she does have a lot of worries because one of her main worries is who's working tonight. And she's talking to the woman who's working the ticket booth, and she finds out that Mauricio is working, the theater attendant, who she's not a fan of. And you kind of get that they have like a weird tension thing, but also her dad is working, and she is really pissed off by that point, and she storms into the projectionist booth, finds her dad, who is this elderly gentleman with a bad cough because he is a smoker and also has health issues. He is a bit of a portly guy, so he definitely seems like the type of dad who, like, you know, you try to get him to stop smoking and he just won't budge, or you try to get him to like ease up off the fucking cake, and he's just like,
Daddy, no! Daddy, no! You know you can't have that. Don't be silly.
He seems like one of those. And so Anna storms in, and the first thing she says to him is, "You lied to us." And he's just like, I didn't lie. And she's just like,
You're a fucking liar. Really?
Because he is just so I guess, against her taking over for him in his job, because she is the projectionist daughter, and also he has taught her a lot of his craft and what he does, and he's basically raised her in the movie theater her entire life. And so he has got this idea that she just can't handle herself for one night. She shows him that she's actually really savvy, because he has this whole speech about life is unpredictable and everything is unpredictable and you never know what could happen and da-da-da-da-da. And he even talks about you don't even know what to do if the film splits in the projector. And she's just like, she actually shows like, Dad, I'm actually with it. Like, I know what the fuck you do here.
I learned it from watching you!
After she manages to get her dad home and, you know, get him out of the theater, because and I like how they did this, because it's crazy how I think about if Anna didn't even stay at the theater, her dad would have just been killed, and then that would have been it. In fact, he probably would have been the first one, the poor man. In fact, it probably would have been Mauricio, then her dad, you know, and then they probably would have just kept playing the movie. But still, like, Anna manages to get her dad out of there, thankfully, and while he is on his merry way with his emphysema cough, she is left to do her homework. She's actually studying for a final, I guess, because, like I said, she's an engineering student. And also, Mauricio, like I said, gives her shit, like, because, like I said, they have this weird tension. He goes into the projectionist booth and he's just bugging the shit out of her, and he's just being extra about everything. Like, for example, he asks for a pack of smokes, and Anna, of course, goes into the drawer and gives them to him. And also, he kind of does snitch on her father too. Like, he reveals where his smoke stash is.
Look like you about ready to go tell on somebody right damn now.
And so that's also why he keeps coughing and still has bad lungs, and his health is not getting any better. And also, Mauricio is just insufferable. He starts going out of his way to piss her off at this point. He's like reading the horoscope section of the paper. And it's so funny because this movie does have subtitles because it's not in English, but you can still get, what the vibe is for the most part. And it's funny. He asks her, in fact, he doesn't even ask her. He assumes what her sign is because he, assumes, oh, she's this because she's a little uptight and everything. And I don't even remember what he assumes her sign to be, but she clarifies that, she's a Capricorn. Capricornio.
¿Me das Virgo?
Capricornio.
Capricornio.
Her sign is actually revealing that her day is going to be very stressful and she's going to be faced with a lot of tough decisions, and it just feels like very foreshadowy, of course. Like, in fact, I'm sure this is not the first movie to do. In fact, it's not. I actually covered A Bay of Blood, which also does this kind of morbid, I guess, fortune-telling or horoscope thing where it's just, predicting death is on the horizon or something treacherous that's going to cause you to do something is on the horizon. So that seems to be what Anna's vibe is.
You're doomed to stay.
He low-key kind of threatens her, which I thought was a little strange because any normal person could see that she's studying, but he just wants to be a dick about it. And he's just like, you ought to be nicer to me. And, it was just really weird how he worded it. You know what I mean? Like, it was just kind of like, okay, like, this is uncomfortable.
100%.
Anna is still just like, I guess, very headstrong. And she just, points her finger and she's just like, get the fuck out.
¿Estás segura que sos Capricornio?
And he leaves, and what happens is he is the first one to get killed by the killer. He goes out because, like I said, he, revealed her dad's smoking stash, and he only smokes casinos, by the way.
Los casinos. Yo solo fumo casino.
He goes outside, and while he is smoking, it's very chill. There's nobody around, by the way. The killer drags him in because what Mauricio does is, and I love the way they did this, Mauricio takes a hit of the cigarette, but he doesn't release the smoke because the killer grabs him instantly by the mouth and then slices his throat open. But of course, smoke comes out of his throat while he's bleeding out and everything. It's a cool shot, by the way. There's actually a lot of great cinematography in this movie, and also all the deaths are practical effects. I love how it's practical effects. I don't think we got any CGI in this movie whatsoever. We might have gotten CGI blood when Homeboy gets killed in the bathroom later in the movie, but I really don't think that was. I think it was done in a certain way, but I could be wrong, but I think that might have been the only time we got anything really CGI. Everything else is just straight up practical, which I love. In fact, because this killer is known for taking eyeballs, we get a really awesome shot where after he kills this old man, after strangling him from behind, I believe, he takes one of the spoons or whatever and he jams it into his socket, and you see like the spoon like scooping the eye out, and you see all the eye meat and shit. Like, it's just, it's gross, but at the same time, like, it's a great shot. Like, really, like, great practical effects. And so after Mauricio's been killed, the killer takes his keys and also manages to get a signature weapon, which is basically, it's like a rebar sword because it has like a circular handle, but it's like a huge stick of rebar, which he jams into the mechanism of it to close it. He busts it off, and of course it kind of forms the perfect spike. And that also does come into play later for a very great death sequence, even though I hate that it's a death sequence of one of my favorite characters in this movie.
God damn it!
Anna's by herself studying, and meanwhile the patrons in the theater are now on the chopping block. So we've got a little boy named Tomas. Tomas and his friends, they were attempting to stay for the horror movie. They get busted by Mauricio, but Tomas is smart enough to hide, I guess. But he stays and, just keeps quiet and tries to keep a low profile, even though this kid is scared shitless the entire movie, you guys. Like, I'm pretty sure he pisses his pants at one point, and also there's a point where he's so, just petrified of what he's watching. on the screen that he puts his chocolate bar to his face and just jams it through his, and it's just like melted chocolate everywhere because he's just like, what the bro. But I thought that was funny too, because I remember I was petrified, like I said, when I saw the first Scream when I was really little. I couldn't sleep for days just because I was like, what the did I just watch? But now it's literally like the best thing ever to me. So, he might grow out. Well, then the way his character is traumatized, I don't think he's going to grow out of it.
This is what trauma looks like.
We have this couple on a date. I don't think it's a blind date, but they just seem very hot and cold. Well, the girl does. The girl, she seems very hot and cold. She's kind of like this haughty, she's just she's more self-aware and more, I guess, self-confident as opposed to the guy she's on a date with, because this guy, he seems very like, this girl is so out of my league. Like, how the fuck did she even say yes? We got money! He's there, he's present, but still, like, their dynamic is just very hot and cold. Like, and you think, like, she's either going to be really bitchy to him and it's just going to go south, is pretty much the vibe. But still, in fact, I kind of liked how she was a bit hard to read as a character, because I was instantly just thinking, like, oh, this is like the date from hell. She is just not feeling this guy at all. She thinks he's a dud. He thinks she's out of his league. He's got no self-confidence whatsoever. But they actually surprised me, because the guy, I'm thinking this girl is really going to just straight up like do the worst to him, because right when she starts talking about, oh, by the way, my aunt, she's having a party today. It's her birthday. So I'm instantly just thinking like, bitch, you lie. Because the first thing I'm thinking is like, you're halfway through the movie and already you're just kind of like, so my aunt's got a birthday party.
You just made that up.
I just thought that was so fucking random, but it turns out it's actually not a lie. It turns out she actually really wants to fuck him, which I was kind of surprised by. But she was like, well, I really wanted to, have more time for us to, but I guess I could, give you a handy. And so she does. She gives him a hand job in the middle of the theater. And, she like subtly does it. Like all of a sudden he just looks down and she's just unzipping his pants. But she makes him basically jizz everywhere. But it's very quiet. It's not like Chip and Brandy in the to-do list. One, it's not like lifting his arm and just like straight up like breathing heavy. It is also not like he screams out, I love you when he comes.
I love you.
But still, it's just a very funny scene regardless. And he runs off to the bathroom because, like I said, he's got a jizz stain in his jeans. Jizzed in my pants. He also runs into Tomas, who at some point does sneak out of the theater. And it's funny because the dude on a date, he actually slips in blood that is also on a newspaper, because the killer like wiped something off with newspaper, that I think it was his hands were bloody and he wiped it off with newspaper, but it's still fresh and it gets all over homeboy's jeans. And it's funny, he actually runs into Anna and the little boy. He runs into the little boy and they both kind of have like a weird stare down, like, you've got, but that's later in the bathroom. And also Anna looks and she's just like, because she's pointing at the blood on his back pocket. He says it was like water or something like that, but she's just like, the like Anna is so unnaturally unsuspecting until like shit really starts to seem off, which I kind of get, but like the blood thing, that would have been a bit much for me to be like, that's not weird.
This is not okay.
I just feel like that should have been a red flag for her. That something at least was going on, not with him, but just something. But either way, it was a funny moment. But the guy is in the bathroom and he hides in the stall when the killer all of a sudden appears. But the thing is, the killer snatches him out of the stall and also smashes his face on the floor quite a few times. And then we get this tense, like, okay, the difference with the deaths in this movie, they're either you see them in a distance because they're happening in the background and it's meant to be creepy because it's happening in the theater, or it's very up close and personal and you get like an intense, like, you know, what is this killer going to do to this person? That happens at least twice. This movie has a lot of 80s synth strikes to it when it comes to the music and also the score and everything like that. Like a lot of 80s, early 90s, late 80s synth pop wave vibes going on, especially one part when Anna steps out of the projection booth and you see her like down the hallway and you see like the shears and stuff right there. There's just something about the music there that just really got me, and I was just very like, oh yeah, like I feel the vibe with this. And I really do like the fact that it's set in 93, because it could have been set in any time, but the fact that we went to the 90s, I think is cool. And also that helps eliminate the use for technology. Sometimes it is good to go back in time and sort of figure out ways to eliminate use of technology, or figure out how to inhibit technology in some way that it was easily inhibited back then, you know, because nowadays certain things like maybe even signal jammers don't work anymore, but say in the 90s or early 2000s, they were probably a lot more effective. So I just think about things like that. The killer has the guy who's on the date, he has him with the knife like to his face. You see that the dude has his movie ticket in his shirt pocket, and the killer stabs through the ticket into his chest, into his heart, and ultimately just kills the guy instantly. And you see him just, you know, plop down on the bloody toilet and everything, but we don't see the killer take his eyes, but presumably, of course, he did, and put them in the, you know, in the pickle jar.
I love pickles.
It's a pickle jar. And so, I mean, let's be real, he's pickling these eyeballs. Like, it's just weird.
So I have 2 pickles today. Hey.
He definitely eats them. He eats one at one point, and it's really gross. It's a cool shot, but it's just like, he pickles eyeballs.
You guys are fucked up, man.
After he kills homeboy in the bathroom, he then kills his date. It's funny, she's not even paying attention. It's kind of like him and his date, they go out the same way that Phil and Maureen go out in Scream 2, except for homegirl, she doesn't run up on stage and scream and cause a ruckus or anything.
Entanglement with August.
She's not even paying attention, but you see this black figure, it's standing in front of her, and she just looks up. All of a sudden, she just gets a knife to the heart. Her death is actually what causes everyone to realize that the killer is there, because before she's even killed, because right when she's getting killed, that's when the film in the theater splits, and that's when Anna's put to the test of, okay, do you know what to do when the film splits, because your dad was talking about that. Of course, Anna handles it like a boss-ass bitch.
Period! Period.
She thinks everybody's screaming because the film split, and she doesn't even realize or look through the window to see, because when the film splits, the whole theater is illuminated, so you can see all the dead bodies that are there. And that's when Angela, who is checking on Beanie Boy and Brooke, who we'll get into that situation later, when Angela realizes that everyone's dead, that's because the film had split and the lights have shown everything, but beforehand you couldn't really tell. It was just like, okay, people are in the audience, but they're not really moving. It's not just a couple, there's also a group of teenagers, a group of 3. There is Beanie Boy, there is Yoni, who is he looks like Newman from Seinfeld. In fact, actually, I'm going to call him Baby Newman. So we've got Beanie Boy, Baby Newman.
Hello, Newman.
And Angela. And they are 3 teenagers who decide to get drunk and just go to the movies. You know, it's the weekend, whatever. And the thing is, it's cute. Beanie Boy is so obsessed with this girl he saw on the bus. He is just like, oh my God, it's fate. Like, he reminds me of Preston Myers from Can't Hardly Wait, just because he has this like, oh, you know, it's all coming together. It's like it's fate. And
Fate's finally giving me a second chance.
I hope I get to see her again. Like, he's just so entranced by this girl. And the reason I call her Brooke is because she, I guess, looks like Brooke Shields from the Blue Lagoon. At least to him, she resembles Brooke Shields.
Brooke Shields!
¡Puta madre, no me salía!
¿Lo qué?
¿Quién es Lucy?
La de la Laguna Azul.
Beanie Boy, Baby Newman, and Angela, they all show up to the movie theater drunk. And also, I mentioned that this old man gets killed. He gets strangled from behind. But we also get this other old man who's homeless and was trying to stay for the horror movie. And he tries to pull like a I already paid thing with Mauricio, because Mauricio, when he is introduced as the theater attendant, he gets the kids out of there and Tomas stays. But then he talks to the homeless guy and he's just like, dude, you have to pay for the next movie. And he's just like, oh, I've already paid. You know, like he's just one of those. And Mauricio, he just lets him be because he's just like, fuck this, I don't get paid enough.
I quit.
And then when the kids show up drunk, then the old guy has the audacity. He just gets so mad. He's just like, shut the fuck up! He just like gets so irate and then he just leaves. So, and he actually leaves before the killer even strikes. So he actually avoids this entire massacre, by the way.
You're so lucky.
When the kids get to the movie theater, Beanie Boy, he realizes that Brooke has shown up to the movie by herself. And it turns out that Brooke, she, I guess, got stood up. And so Beanie Boy uses this moment to all of a sudden just be like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk to that girl. But the whole time, it's actually funny. Baby Newman is such a fucking pessimist. In fact, he is the most negative friend out of all of them. Like, he just really gives Beanie Boy shit all the time.
If you just have your ashes hauled, you wouldn't have to spend all this time playing Emily Vanderbilt.
But then Angela, she's at least kind of like a little bit supportive. When he finally gets the courage to go talk to Brooke, he is so cute. He takes off his beanie and just runs his hand through his hair. He's got shoulder length hair, by the way. Like, he's very like 90s skater. And in fact, I think all these kids are like skateboard kids, basically. And so Beanie Boy, he just goes down and he is so suave. Like, literally like sits next to her. He's a gentleman. It is so cute. They actually kiss, and it turns out he reveals it's his first kiss. And I thought, no, this is so cute. Please survive.
There's no place for that here.
And I was pissed because they kill Beanie Boy. Wow. Okay.
You were hurtful and you were absolutely wrong.
While him and Brooke are kissing, the killer takes his rebar sword and he smashes it all the way through the back of Brooke's head, and the rebar goes through Beanie Boy's mouth and out the back of his. And there's a little bit of a struggle, but for the most part, they die instantly, and he smashes their heads together. And so, but he leaves the sword in their heads, so it looks like they're still making out, but you can't really tell because their bodies are like leaning to the side, so you can't see the sword. But Angela, she can see them from the balcony where they're sitting, and she's just looking down like, Baby Newman, don't you think that look weird?
The vibe's off, man.
Usually when you're hooking up, you're like, you're moving. They're not moving. Like, what the f*** is up with that? But of course, Baby Newman is just like, whatever, just watch the movie. He doesn't really care. But Angela still just keeps on like, no, this is weird.
Eddie's not right.
Angela is just like sketched out at this point. Meanwhile, Anna, she has checked out the theater a little bit and noticed there is some blood in certain places. Like, she notices blood on the railing, but she doesn't find anything like a body. She doesn't find the killer. She does find his bag, but he's taken a lot of shit out of there by now, including like knives or whatever he uses. And so Anna hasn't found anything solid to go on. So she still goes back up to the projection booth, and then the film splits, and then we get, you know, that there's dead bodies in there because Angela decides to check out Beanie Boy and just make sure he's good. But by the time she gets down there, one, she realizes Beanie Boy and Brooke are dead.
They're all dead. They're all dead.
She runs away. The killer is chasing after her. Then by that time, Baby Newman is like, holy shit. Okay, yes, there's a killer in here. There's something off.
Exactly. Thank you.
The killer manages to get Baby Newman. The killer's just screaming, vile weed!
Vile weed!
The killer chases after her. Meanwhile, Tomas, he's still in the theater just like hiding. Like, he's just like, what the f***, bro. Like, there's dead bodies in here. This is not okay. Like, I should have went with my friends.
He's a kid. Kids are stupid.
Angela, what she did when the killer was approaching her, she tried to escape, but then she grabbed a fire extinguisher, sprayed him, and then bashed him. But the thing is, Angela's dumbass. She doesn't take the fire extinguisher with her, I don't think, which, just like, Angela, okay. I wanted Angela to make better decisions, but unfortunately, Angela could not make any good decisions to save her life, literally. And honestly, half the bad decisions in this movie were Angela's.
You are stupid. You're not smart. You're not smart.
Angela and Anna managed to overpower the killer, and also Anna does manage to save Tomas out of the theater because Tomas just acts like he can't say anything, but the killer nearly kills him, but Anna saves him. And so Anna saves Tomas and Angela, but the thing is, when Anna and Angela first meet, Angela is freaking the fuck out. And now, and mind you, I get it, but still, it's like, dude, like, you just like our last chance of survival, because Angela decides to panic her ass off and she throws the fire extinguisher that she had. In fact, she does take it with her. She takes the fire extinguisher, throws it through the ticket booth, not realizing that the phone was in there, and she threw the fire extinguisher into the phone. And this is a 90s landline phone. That is not surviving a fire extinguisher just like obliterating it into pieces. So Anna can't even call anybody, and she's just like, okay, thanks, kid. And so then they end up getting cornered in the projection booth, and this is what I'm talking about when I say like the eyeballer actually eats eyeballs, because this he is smiling at them because, one, he had to take out his own eye. So basically, Anna at one point manages to get a piece of glass and stab the killer in the eye. This fool, he takes the glass out, but then like his eye is like partially out anyway, and so he's just like got to basically, in fact, I don't remember if he cut it off or he just straight up just yanked it off by the nerve, but it's just a painful scene to watch. And like I said, great practical effects throughout this entire movie, but like, really, like, it's a painful scene. But then this guy, he's weird. He can feel pain, but pain really doesn't do a whole lot to him, because he takes his own eyeball and puts it in his mouth, and he just like opens it and he like winks with the other one. It's a weird scene. When the kids are forced to watch this, Anna is covering Tomas's eye, but like he like tries to move her hand down so he can see. Like, Tomas is just like, no, I want to see. It's the same thing with the movie, like this kid just acts like I can handle it. I can handle it. Like, no, you can't. You can't handle it, kid.
Damn, this is some scary shit.
They split off because the killer tries to go after them, but Tomas and Anna, they escape one way. Angela's dumbass escapes the other way. Angela's doomed, y'all.
Doom awaits you.
The funny thing is with this movie, when it comes to a movie theater being the set scenario and location for a massacre like this, you would think that they would have gone for the roof sooner. In my story, where it has the whole theater massacre thing, we get a lot of the roof. We get a lot of the roof, and we get a lot of action up there. We, get some dialogue and also a death from the roof down. Angela tries to make her way up to the roof, but she barely makes it up there, because by the time she does, the killer pulls her down, drags her all the way back into the projection booth. This is also a creative death that I didn't see coming, because in my story, I really wanted to do a lot of movie theater themed type deaths, and my thing was not about having people stay in one place. My thing was people have to split off, because that's how you do a whodunit. Like, people have to be split everywhere, so you're wondering who is who. But my thing was I wanted deaths to be particularly catered to the movie theater. This movie, straight up stabbings, nothing kind of novel or cool. I mean, and I don't mean cool as in like, because the rebar sword through both heads that was a good one. But I just feel like some of my deaths sort of took a bit more of a novel approach and more of a macabre approach. And also I played on the fact that of the idea of not necessarily hooking up in movie theaters, because that's kind of what this movie does. It actually does have good use of sexuality. My particular story does not necessarily utilize much sexuality like you would think. In the movie theater setting, it does utilize sexuality in a different way, in multiple different ways, of course, but it's less about, okay, you're going to get a scene where somebody gets a hand job in a theater. Mine was more so focused on pranks and, the type of shenanigans you could get into during a midnight showing that don't necessarily lead to getting laid. It's more so just like, you're just a bunch of punk teenagers trying to have a good time. And so that's kind of the difference between my story and this one, which once again, like I said, I just, you got to be original. And I'm glad I'm original enough to have come up with something that's not directly like The Last Matinee, thank God. And so Angela, this was a creative death I loved. Angela, the killer, slams her head into the opening of the projector and crushes her head with the lid, and we just get splatter and splatter and splatter until she's dead. But what happens is, and also the movie does this great use of color. There's a lot of emphasis on red in this movie, especially. Like, not just the title card, not just, the beginning, but it's the fact of we get this huge emphasis on red after Angela's killed because her blood in the projector causes the whole theater to go red. So we actually get a shot of Anna and Tomas when they re-enter, and they're just cast in blood red, and it's really, really cool. And also, the carpet in the theater is red, the seats are red, the doors and the, railings have red. It's just, there's so much red in the beginning of this movie. And also, one cool thing that I love that they did, they actually mirror what happens in the beginning with this kid's gumballs and what happens with the jar of pickled eyeballs, because the same thing happens. They both fall down the floor. Like, we get in the beginning this group of kids coming down the steps, and this kid, he actually drops his gumballs and you see them slowly going down the steps. That's mimicked with the eyeballs at the end, because the killer does get stabbed by Anna, and he gets stabbed with the rebar sword. And also he gets stabbed right in front of Tomas. Like, the blood actually sprays all over Tomas. This kid just literally gets a blood shower. It's so funny. And then the killer actually just like drops the jar of eyeballs, but the eyeballs fall down the steps. You just see them like bouncing and shit in slow motion. And it's really cool to see that mirrored from like the beginning of the movie, where it's like, oh, the movie theater is this place for kids and it's a fun place to go. And there's so much fun and innocence and getting lost in the picture. And then what actually happened after that was the opposite, which is a massacre, and it's a nightmare. It's something you can't escape. They couldn't get out of the theater, and so it's just like all of a sudden gumballs turn to eyeballs. Joy becomes terror, and that's also in a sense almost like innocence lost, which I think is a good theme with this, because Tomas's innocence, especially at the end of the movie, he's traumatized. By the way, like his innocence is totally corrupted. Like, one, he stuck around for a horror movie. That's one sense of innocence lost, but because you never forget your first horror. But even then, he's also just like, he's witnessed death. He's witnessed blood, gore, murder, everything. He's just left to look at this eyeball on the steps. This kid is seen more than he should have in a day. And you think about the transfer of terror and what that actually means, because when I think about the transfer of terror and how it's executed in horror, I have my qualms, just because when I think of, and this is a good example, I think of Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. I think about the transfer of terror that Adam Marcus executed, which was actually kind of genius now that I think about it, because for a guy who didn't think he knew what he was doing, he actually knew what the he was doing, because the way he captured this idea of transferring terror from Jason from one person to another was actually very, one, cool, and also, like I said, well executed. I mean, they melt after they transfer their soul from another person. But even then, it was still just kind of like, okay, you get the idea of the direct idea of transferring evil from this evil in this particular franchise from one person to another, but I like the idea of you can transfer evil in multiple ways. It doesn't have to be direct contact with the killer. It can be psychological. It can be deep in your subconscious, that either these people that didn't have an a direct interaction with the killer, they're still either going to be terrified of this killer, they may end up a killer. There are certain things that can just happen, or they just may end up being traumatized by this killer to the point that they can't do something like a normal person you would think would be able to do something.
PTSD, trauma, post-traumatic stress.
And so that's kind of what I feel. I feel like this movie kind of took the transfer of terror and did something clever and more subtle with it. And it actually was, even though this person did have direct contact with the killer, this is kind of like, this kid is traumatized for life, and it kind of makes you wonder, what is Tomas's trauma going to be? Could he become just like this killer? Could he have an affinity for, eyeballs and eyeball pickling? And, could the movie theater be his, chosen place to commit murders? Or could he be traumatized by theaters and never want to go to a fucking theater ever again? Or, could it be a mix of both? It kind of makes you think of, how can we do the transfer of terror from one person to another? How can we write about that and execute that in film to a point where it's not cliche? Because the next film I'm going to cover on the podcast did it in the most cliche way, and I just feel so, one, confused, confuddled, insulted. Even the book on this movie apparently confirmed that the evil was transferred, yeah, that's why I wanted to do this movie first. This is like a good comparison between this movie and the next movie I'm going to cover. But yeah, it's just like, there are ways to do the transfer of terror without it being fucking direct and without the killer like touching you, because I just feel like Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday was kind of like the innovator in that, in a sense, like of how you transfer terror in a literal sense, and it actually is executed well. I feel like this next one really phoned it in. I feel like, if anything, the Last Matinee really actually took a concentrated idea and was like, there's a transfer of terror here that's very noticeable, and it sticks with you at the end of the movie, because it really does. Like, I can't watch this movie without thinking about Tomas at the end and just thinking like, dude, this kid is affected. Like, he's not just been through something, like he's affected by this now. Like, he will never be the same, when he looks into another person's eyes. And so I feel like there are good ways and proper ways to do that, and also very shitty ways to do that. And I feel like while The Last Matinee hit the nail on the head and did it right, this next one, ooh, Jesus. What are we doing here? What are we doing? But either way, I'll save that for next episode. But that is The Last Matinee, and I really enjoyed it. I would actually give this movie, I'll give this movie a good 4 slashes, just because, yeah, it's not doing anything totally out of the ordinary or new, and we do have some horror movies that are just straight up like, wrong place, wrong time, the killer happened to be there, and boom, horror scenario. But even then, this movie did a lot with very little, and that's why I appreciate appreciate, especially when you have a movie theater setting like that and it's very contained. There's only so much you can do in a space like that. And so you really have to get creative. And I like the fact that while they didn't get too creative, they got creative enough and they stayed original to them in a sense to where we got a story that, one, is not going to be similar to another story of a horror massacre in a theater. And it's also going to be something that you're going to have a different effect because it has something different to say. This movie, I don't think, has a whole lot to say in terms of message. Meanwhile, in comparison to my particular story, it does have a lot to say. And there are a lot of themes to explore, from queer horror to black pain in film to a lot of things. So I think that's, a big difference. It's just that there were deeper, more poignant themes explored in my story because it's a long-winded, as opposed to a film that's an hour and maybe 30 minutes. So I get that, but I definitely enjoyed The Last Matinee. I definitely give it 4 slashes. And also, I would like to thank you guys for tuning in to the Slasha Brotha podcast. If you would like to follow me on social media, you can find me at Slasha Brotha on Instagram. You can email me if you have any questions or concerns at slashabrotha@gmail.com. And also, my personal is Martian Prince Jr. My art Instagram is Richard's Killer Hand. And yes, that's about it. So until it is time to slay another day, I will see you guys in the next one.